It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Hello, Irwin.
I think one could really make the argument that forget polo and horseback riding and tennis, and the greatest spectator sport on Eastern Long Island might very well be real estate.
Real estate. Our favorite topic.
Our favorite topic.
Or actually a lot of people's favorite topic.
A lot of people, I think all of us are really sort of real estate voyeurs.
Right? Yeah.
I'll admit, when I get the East Hampton Star, I go to recorded deeds. I do look at that.
Well, that's kind of interesting. I just, I get tired of like every newspaper, every magazine. It's just real estate ad after real estate ad after real estate ad after real estate ad.
Exactly true. And what's funny, Esperanza, we're talking about real estate, and we've had conversations about our Hamptons where real estate leads into amenities and supersizing and this and that.
And it's because it's all luxury.
Yeah, exactly. But this is going to be a little bit of a different tact we're going to go to today. We're going to do sort of a look back. And again, we our Hamptons audience knows this about Esperanza and I by now. We love this certain sweet spot, the 70s, the 80s, really sort of the cusp of when the craziness, the Hamptonization we've spoke of took place. But real estate as an industry back then, and again, we're going to talk in terms of that 70, whatever, 80, we're going to go through all of them. It was a very different business.
Yeah. Late 60s. I mean,
exactly.
Maybe. Because late 50s, this was still too rural and too like even impoverished, if you will. Like it wasn't so much the hot spot that it became in the 60s, 70s, right?
It's totally true, Esperanza, but it is a subject that really fascinates all of us. This is like a real cocktail party icebreaker. Let's talk real estate.
I like this. I like this.
And I know I go back here, to the late 80s. You go back obviously a little sooner, but I remember, and again, what we're talking about, you go into any downtown out here, and the real estate industry is just very different right now. It's all global brands.
Mm-hmm.
And we spoke about this before we signed on. We could go walk into whatever, the Compasses, the Brown Harris Stevens,
Sotheby's.
We can discuss East Hampton. We can discuss Tokyo in the same place.
Right. But,
and that can take place.
We need to move to Dubai. Here you go.
Exactly. Where they can segue right into that. But it wasn't always like that.
No, these were the mom and pops back then.
These were really, and I it's funny. I just wrote down a list literally from memory, not even going by Google. And I wrote this and I sent it to Esperanza, and I thought of some of these old brokers that were out here, Burnett Realty and Watermill. And I said to Esperanza, I remember this was like a little storefront on the north side of Montauk Highway.
Was it near the candy?
I think it was just east of the candy, the little candy store that remains, that remains our dream to reopen.
It's like the zombie store.
The zombie store. But there was a place I remember, Burnett's Cove and Watermill. And I've always said to myself, wow, I bet you that was old man or old lady Burnett that ran that.
Yeah.
And I bought my house, I remember, in 1989 from Harold Shepard, sole little agency. The Tuma agency in Montauk we spoke of.
Right.
Spoke of that even during Leisure-Rama. There was Edward F. Cook, the Cook Pony Farm.
Right.
Edward Pospisil, Osborne, Maidstone Village. Blue Bay Realty, which had a little office on 3 Mile Harbor Road in Springs, believe it or not. So there were.
Ammett and Gay. I mean, some of them were originally like harness dealers, or sellers. Like I think Ammett and Gay was, then insurance, then
exactly
real estate. They kept, kind of they sort diversifying their portfolios.
And they sort of did a little bit of everything, and again, some of these are all families. There was a Dayton Realty, there was a Dayton builder. They probably,
I think we're the same, maybe.
They might the same. Well,
they built my family house. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, Ernie Dayton did. Yeah.
Right. And if they weren't the same business, there was certainly cross-pollination of some kind, like they worked together. But There were a couple though that were real, and we're going to really focus on. We're going to get a lot of this information. Look, interestingly, there wasn't a tremendous amount of information. And believe me, we went through the East Hampton Star. We went through a lot of places.
What, you're saying nobody wants to write the history of real estate in the Hamptons?
I guess our Hamptons podcast is going to have
to
be
groundbreaking.
We really are. Maybe we need a press release that's saying we're doing this. This is, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very informal history, trust me. But it's I think it's a fun history, Esperanza, safe to say. Would you call it?
I think so. Yeah. Lots of good anecdotes.
And Esperanza used that word before we signed on, and I think it was a good one. It's going to be a little more anecdotal. There are times we share everything with our Hamptons podcast audience. There are times we have an outline that is page after page after page after page. Sometimes it's not. And there may be a little bit of, to use my guitar lingo, a little bit of riffing here, but that's okay. I think there's a lot of substance here, but some of the good information we got was a book probably a lot of our audience read. I remember reading it, sort of a gossipy, juicy book. Stephen Gaines's Philistine at the Hedgerows. You read it, Esperanza?
I have, yeah.
Fun book to read. And the book, if I'm not mistaken, actually opened with really, you could argue, the guy that sort of really, the first to really change the industry a little bit out here, who was Allan M. Schneider. Sort of a big personality. We'll get into it. But Stephen Gaines in his book said, in 1969, Allan M. Schneider, that's when he started coming here, 69, 70. In Southampton to East Hampton, the population, year round was 27,000 from, and from 1950 to 1960, and the population grew 68% by the late 60s. And this was an interesting stat that Stephen relayed in this book. 3 of every 4 homes built at that point. Now, remember, this is 1969, were for summer people.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like a very believable statistic. Yeah.
So, and we'll get into a little bit of Allan Schneider's personality when he got here. There's a lot written about him. Some of his own personal history. We don't slander anyone on our Hamptons, but let's just say there was possibilities that certain things were fabricated. He was
little myth creation. Yeah.
Myth creation. He was trying, in a sense, I guess he was sort of this is not Stephen Gaines talking. This is my personal take. It's sort of, he was trying to, in his own way, create a brand. He came out here.
Yeah.
A guy originally from Brooklyn, from what I read, claimed to be Brooklyn Heights, was actually Flatbush. I'm from Queens, but let me tell you, Brooklyn Heights and Flatbush are 2 very different places, Esperanza. But
back then and now.
But he was claiming, I guess he was trying to create whatever this persona, is it fair to say?
Yeah, that's an excellent word for that.
Okay. Yeah. And he started working. Now, I don't remember this particular broker. This is circa 1970, Carolyn Rose and Watermill. I was before my time. I don't really remember, but
Rose Jeweler family, maybe,
you never
the
know.
Rose family.
You never know.
From Southampton.
This was a really cool point Stephen Gaines brought out in this book about what Allan Schneider really uncovered. And I'm going to use it really direct from the book. He was surprised to find the local real estate business frozen in time. Wow, little Paul Goldberger.
I was just going to say, that just made me think of him. Yeah.
Right. And in the early 70s, this is really telling, and really whatever Allan M. Schneider was or wasn't, props to him that he sort of recognized this. In the early 1970s, there were only about a half a dozen or so brokers throughout the East End, the same since they were in the 1950s. And I love Stephen's writing here. Mom and pops with scratched oak desks, green metal filing cabinets, and the salespeople were retirees or housewives or widows. No financing advice, no real sales pitch. I mean,
it's so true. I feel like, I was very young, but I feel like that describes my parents' experience of buying a house here in the mid 70s.
Yeah, and again, look, part of it is that the industry as a whole has dramatically changed again with all of these corporate brands, that we spoke of that are here. And yes, to your point, you can walk into Main Street, Southampton, and talk about Dubai with these people. That's the nature of the business. But I remember even, Esperanza, when Rachel and I went out looking for houses, and we ultimately bought from Harold Shepard, but we looked and I was scratching my head trying to remember the name, but we actually went with a broker, a small little shop on Noyak Road.
Oh,
we
yes.
Were looking at,
Isn't it still there?
I think the building is still there, and it might have been like taken over by a town and country, somebody else.
Or yeah, exactly.
I was racking my brains. Of course, I couldn't check my email because there was none in 1989. At least not that I had, but I remember going with this our experience, a very local kind of real born and bred, salt of the earth kind of guy, not a high pressure salesman. We sort of went in his country squire station wagon with the wood paneling.
Yeah.
And he took us,
not the Audi.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he wasn't charging up his e-vehicle, and let me get another few minutes of charge on before we go. And I remember like going, we went to the Redwood section of Sag Harbor. Like I had a couple of areas off in Noyak. We didn't end up there, but I remember the experience, and literally with index cards.
Oh God, yeah, right. I mean, this was.
Yeah, I mean, this was everything's so transparent.
Years, yeah.
I mean, everything's so transparent now, but that was really like the experience of it. But it was a very cool story when I look back. Wow, that was fun to think about. But anyway, Stephen, talks about how, that was all well and good for people like us that were looking for like a modest house, but the money to be made at that time in real estate. Now, again, we're talking whatever. We're gonna call this 50s, 60s, 70, early 70s. It was really through the summer colony. And according to Stephen Gaines, this is pre Allan M. Schneider, and we're going to get into another woman whose name will ring a bell very shortly, but the rich tended to buy through Southampton's Lyda Barclay. And if it was East Hampton, it was Mrs. Condie Lamb, aka Boots Lamb.
Right.
Those were the go-tos in terms of real estate in this era of scratch desks and green metal filing cabinets. The summer people weren't going to those. I don't believe, Esperanza. The summer colony was apparently going through these two. And Stephen Gaines continues how Allan sort of saw this, but Allan M. Schneider recognized it was more than just knowing the blue bloods. And I guess that was the client base of Mrs. Lamb and Mrs. Barclay, the blue bloods. But it was knowing the workmen, the farmers, the builders, the police, the teachers. And part of where he made all of these connections was his nightly hanging out. An episode we look back on fondly. This was at the same era. Bobby Van's in Bridgehampton opened around the same time as Allan M. Schneider, early 1970s. And Stephen Gaines refers to this. That was Real Estate Central.
Allan sort of like I maybe would say like the American Hotel might be. Or even Bobby Van's today might still be, but definitely the hotel.
But it looks back on that episode we did when we spoke about the bars and touched about Barbie Vans.
Everybody congregated there, right?
Be a fly on the wall with the little Esperanza, could you bring us back to that episode and say literari again in your beautiful accent?
The glitterati.
The glitterati. Thank you. I'm so glad we like to reminisce on our health. So in addition to that glitterati in Bobby Vans, we did have
and the farmers.
And they were there too, believe me. But I guess Allan M. Schneider, I'm going to take poetic license here, Esperanza, and say he probably held court there. And that's where he made, many of these connections. And continuing on here, he happened to get a random phone call from Ray Wesnofsky. Now, this is an old farm. I recognize this name when I read.
Farming family, but the founder of Bridgehampton National Bank.
Exactly. Or chairman at the time. And, they owned 1,000 acres here. And And again, this is, boy, we touched on this theme so many times here, the transcending of the farm community to, to realizing how valuable the land was, not to mention the effect of the estate taxes, which every farmer lost sleep over.
Yeah.
So
because the government at the time wasn't really helping them. Yeah.
Exactly. Still not helping that much, but that's another conversation. But so Ray Resnowski called him up, and this was like literally a random phone call that Alan Schneider happened to pick up the phone, and Alan became his personal broker.
Wow.
And,
and this was in the time of landlines, that remind our audience.
That is also true. And it was that was a great point, but it really is true. I mean, there was the means of communication were so different. We spoke about the index cards, right? and if they were a little more advanced, maybe you got like a sheet about the house or the property, right? With maybe an image in black and white, because they probably didn't have color printers.
I mean, I told you, Irwin, how my parents went to the house that they ended up buying, and the agent forgot the key.
Yeah.
And despite that, my father looked in the picture window and said, "This is the house." I mean, it was like not a lot of research, not a lot of, let's look at the schools and how well they, are functioning in the society.
Right. And in other words, not going on Zillow where you see floor plans and virtual tours.
Yeah.
And to the point where they take an empty house and they stage it in front of you.
Correct.
Virtually.
Yeah. No, none of that.
None of that was going on. But so Ray Resnowski, I mean, this was a very smart, savvy family. They recognized what was happening here. And again, this is something, go back to our episodes about Bridgehampton, Wainscott, these areas that transcended Sagaponack from farms, to what it is now. Alan became his personal broker, and he started selling off the land, subdividing the land. And I love this part of the story, Esperanza, how Alan convinced him to buy a small house on Montauk Highway in Bridgehampton so he could be his landlord, and Alan Schneider rented that property.
Yeah. And what that is today, right? Yes, remember what he built there, that monument to self?
Exactly. That freestand that is still there. I think it's a Corcoran office now. Yeah, that looks like really an urban building in the middle of all of that
farm field, basically.
Exactly. But he rented it. And here was the other thing, and this is something now you see that's very common, but this didn't exist before Alan Schneider out here.
Yeah, no, right? Like the real estate was very localized, and he innovated by having branches or branch offices in the different towns.
Exactly right. Stephen Gaines used the word octopus style.
Yes.
And it's really true. I mean, there was an office, Montauk, Amagansett, East Hampton, Bridgehampton, Wayne. I mean, every Sag Harbor, every hamlet had an office.
And you know what's interesting, because I think we decry nowadays all the real estate signs everywhere and all the real estate offices everywhere. Right. But I think I recall my father's and my parents commenting that when we first moved here, that's all there was. It felt like that was one after the other storefront was a real estate office.
And if you look at some of these main streets today,
that's what it is. Exactly. Yeah. So this was really the beginning of it, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, like I've always questioned that to myself also. Like, I mean, this is a business. You really don't even need an office.
You don't need the bricks and mortar, right?
Yeah. But I guess it's the physical presence. I mean, there must be.
Yeah. Well, it's going off on a tangent here, but it's something like banks that are going to go by, by the wayside.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't set foot in a bank in years.
Exactly.
I mean, but why are there all of these? But exactly, we are getting off on a tangent. But but Alan, and again, remember, this was a guy from Brooklyn. This was reinventing himself.
He was a hustler.
But he was a hustler and savvy enough. Look who he started bringing in to manage these offices, Esperanza. Charles Bullock of Lily Pond Lane, because Mr. Bullock apparently had the inn with the Maidstone crew.
Uh-huh.
He ran the East Hampton office. He hired a Richard Harris, a retired shipping line owner, who provided, I wrote here entry, but I'm going to use the term entree into the whole Southampton estate section.
Right.
And the Meadow Club. And that was who ran. So he was smart enough to also pick these kind of people. And believe me, this was a guy from Brooklyn. This was not these are blue bloods. But he connected with them somehow.
Right.
Maybe it was plying them with drinks at Bobby Van's every night.
It certainly wasn't from having attended Princeton.
Yeah. Well, that's
which he made up as well.
Which apparently is another, and I've read that he attended. I read somewhere else he never attended. I take it as it is. I could tell you he was not from Brooklyn Heights. That one I've got confirmed on more than once.
Real estate, after all, is a little bit of storytelling involved.
Exactly. We've spoken about the term village fringe, haven't we?
Exactly. It's about that language that you craft to attract the buyer.
You craft village fringe,
When you read cottage, it's going to be a teeny tiny house.
No question. You read village fringe, it means you're 7 miles out of the village center. But that's the fringe these days. There was another broker I think really also deserves a little bit of play here.
Sure. Fascinating.
And which is also in addition to, and really sort of coming from a very different place,
mm-hmm.
And that person would be Tina Fredericks.
Yes.
Who sort of, I think, Esperanza worked more or less during the same era as Allan M. Schneider.
Yeah.
More or less during that same kind of time frame. She, on the other hand, went to Bennington College. She was, a little bit more, can I say, polished, accomplished, whatever. And also had a career, worked 1949 at Condie Nast.
Mm.
A woman, working at Condie Nast in 1949, that's something, that's saying something.
Yes.
So she had a career. And as a matter of fact, the cool story with Tina Fredericks, which of course she parlayed later, while at Condie Nast, she gave his first job, photographing shoes for the magazine to Andy Warhol.
Brilliant.
And ultimately parlayed that relationship into selling him that majestic property he bought in Montauk, Eothen. So she was a networker also. Smart
lady.
And the self-proclaimed realtor to the stars. That was, and I remember.
And self-proclaimed, I love it. She self-branded. Yeah.
She like Allan Schneider, branded in his way.
It's all about the branding.
Exactly. So apparently she did similar. She branded herself, but again, she had a little bit more. I think she might have brought a little bit more to the table. She had a creative aspect to her. She was also a designer.
Right. There was a different level of sophistication.
I would think so, and was able to sort of visualize a property. But reading about her a little bit, and it was actually a very cool piece in the East Hampton Star. It was a guest word piece actually from right around the time that Tina Fredericks died, by a Martha Weinman Lear. And she was just recollecting like her experience with Tina M. Fredericks. Not only did she know everything, land was always on her mind, and she really knew every piece of property that was coming to market, but she was also very entrepreneurial. She and a partner developed something new on the Hamptons landscape, development really of co-op units and private homes on a beautiful dairy farm in East Hampton Village was Abe Katz's old farm, Esperanza, right?
Right, yeah.
An Alpin farm.
Mm-hmm.
And she had the wherewithal to develop, not just develop it, to conceptualize this. And you remember, co-ops were not a thing on Eastern Long Island.
Yeah.
Right?
And not only that, Irwin, but to this day, I'll stop at Red Horse Market and I look over to this, you could call it a view shed at this point, because it was developed with like a sensitivity that I don't see that much nowadays. And so it's not a development that assaults the eyes. It still kind of looks like a farm.
That is a great point.
And it's all kind of tucked in there, and it's really actually beautiful.
We use a term, and we've used it on a few episodes of our Hamptons, nestled in the dunes, when we describe the Sea Spray cottages, the White family cottages in Sagaponack. It's a great point. I didn't think about that, but that place is nestled. And
it is.
And it seems, the other thing, and it's funny you mentioned that about when you're at Red Horse. every time I ride by there, somehow, some way, there's a horse grazing. Right? Every time. Like it's almost like, what is this, a plant?
It just looks idyllic. It really does.
It really does. But but it really does go back. And I have to tell our Hamptons audience, we're going off script now. This is really sort of, we're riffing right now, but it's so true. Like it just really taps into her sensibilities, her sense of design. And I remember her ads, even like when I was looking her old real estate ads, it said that realty design. That was part of her. That was part of her brand, to use your word.
But sensibility and sensitivity to this place, right? Which is something that we find lacking a lot these days.
That, while yes, you can call Dune Alpin a development. I guess it is.
Which it is. Yes.
Which it is.
I mean, the farm had burned down. Let's be clear.
But it really is. It is so sensitively done, gracious in the vistas and everything, and it really,
there's no fromage about it.
No. It really it's
since we've been throwing around the French throughout this whole episode.
It comes sounds a lot better when you say it. Trust me, my inner Queens just channels that, and I know that's coming through, but. But then she goes on to write how she became friendly with Tina Fredericks, and she had dinners in the lovely Georgica Road carriage house. I remember that carriage house. It was like, I think it was Georgica Road near Briar Patch, somewhere up in there where she lived. They purchased it in 1950 for $6,500, and she operated her office out of there.
Yes,
there was no Main Street office, for the entire time she was in business that I could recall. She operated it.
Again, pre-computer. I mean, I want to say this was like, what an entrepreneur she was.
Yeah. Just really, but like but at the end of the day, she kept saying, she's relaying the story of this writer, how she was looking at this house. It was really too big. The price was $325, and Tina hissed in her ear, buy it. The land alone is worth twice as much.
Yeah, she knew.
That's really the point. She really did know. And again, it just evokes back to Esperanza. There were no analytics in realty back in 1970s.
I have to think it was just more a finger on the pulse.
It was a finger. There were no, I don't even know if the term algorithm existed.
Yeah. No.
At that point in time, but there were no, I'm going out on a limb and saying there were no real estate algorithms at the point. You really depended on these relationships. And again, we talked about how some of them were, housewives, widows, retirees, or whatever. But these two really tapped into something at a time, very much at a time that we talk about a lot on our Hamptons, where it was on the cusp of a transformation of what happened out here.
Yeah.
And, these two, in very different ways with very different styles, really touched on it. Wow, was that fun?
I love it. I mean, these were, like you say, two very distinct pioneers, real estate pioneers on the East End.
Well said. And they were pioneers. Again, Allan recognized that, the industry really wasn't modifying a lot. And again, I don't know if Tina was before or after. I think it was pretty simultaneously. They came more or less around the same time, but they both tapped into something real in each of them doing it differently. Remember, Tina Fredericks was one office. She was more, I guess you would call a boutique firm.
Boutique, yeah.
This was one. Allan Schneider was an octopus.
Yeah.
Tina Fredericks was very specific. Had a very specific lane. Allan Schneider was very different. But again, metaphorically, and we talk about this, we use this term on our Hamptons. Metaphorically, they really mirrored the changes. Maybe some of the changes now we term as unfortunate or just whatever, but
who could have known, right?
Who could have known?
Yeah.
But
they were definitely part of that evolution of this
very successful doing it in very different ways. And now real estate is
is about amenities. Because I had to get that one in here.
It's not an
amenities.
And we could get into the whole. I mean, it is the way it's marketed, but that's not what we're going for here. We wanted to try to bring you back.
This is a great history.
It was just really a sort of a, to use Esperanza's word, and I think it was a good one. It was an anecdotal look back, based on a lot of personal experiences, memories, some information, but not an overwhelming amount. It was we did a lot of interpretation here. Which
I bet you listeners will have some contributions to make when this drops.
We should.
I have a feeling.
I would tend to agree with that. We should really encourage that, especially those, their own experiences, because we've all had those stories. And I'm not just talking the stories of the woulda, shoulda, coulda. If we would have stretched for another $10,000, we would have been here instead of there. I'm talking about just the stories of just how, wow, how's this for a term? How the landscape, no pun intended, really changed.
Yeah. In all senses. Yeah.
Completely true. Esperanza, that was a blast. Thank
you. Great. Thanks for that adventure.
And it was definitely a good adventure. We'll have to come up with one to top it.
Oh my gosh. I think we will. So, maybe equal.
we like to set a high bar on our hands. Thank you, Esperanza.
Thanks, Irwin. Until next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.